Driverly.com, unlimited drama series.
My son Mason threw down his school folder on the kitchen table, his 10-year-old face twisted with newfound arrogance. I don't want your last name anymore. My new dad says you're a loser and I should take a real man's name. My wife Deborah beamed from the doorway, her yoga-toned arms crossed, that smug smile I'd grown to despise plastered across her face. She'd been coaching him, no doubt about it. I said nothing, just stared at the kid I'd raised for a decade, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a curveball, to stand up for himself. Now he was parroting some other man's words like a trained parrot. "Well?" Deb pressed, her voice honey-sweet with victory. "Aren't you going to say something? Maybe apologize for being such a disappointment?" I calmly reached into my briefcase and pulled out a pen. The Mont Blanc she'd bought me for our anniversary 3 years ago, back when she still pretended to love me. "Fine," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Sign here." I slid a document across the table. Mason looked confused, but Deb's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She probably thought it was divorce papers. Hell, she probably thought she'd finally broken me. "What is it?" Mason asked, suddenly uncertain. "Just paperwork, buddy," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Adult stuff. Your mom knows what she's doing." Deb snatched the pen and signed with a flourish, not even bothering to read past the header. Then she guided Mason's small hand, helping him scrawl his name in crayon. "There," she said triumphantly. "Now Chad can adopt him properly. A real family at last." I collected the papers, folded them neatly, and tucked them back into my briefcase. "Enjoy your new life," I said, standing up. I grabbed my keys from the counter and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Deb called after me, but I was already walking out into the crisp October air of our small New England town. A week later, I was sitting in Tommy's garage, sharing a beer and watching him work on his Camaro, when Deb's phone call came through the police scanner he kept running. Our family estate lawyer, Mr. Gold, was trying to reach her urgently. I smiled and took another sip of my Budweiser. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Deb's number. I let it go to voicemail, then another, then another. By the fifth call, I finally picked up. "What did you do?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "Mr. Gold says..." "Says what?" I asked calmly. "He says I signed away liability, that there's contamination, that we owe..." Her voice cracked. $4.7 million. "Brent, what the hell's going on?" I leaned back in Tommy's lawn chair, watching him torque down lug nuts. "Remember when you said you wanted a real man? Well, real men read the fine print before they sign legal documents." The line went dead. See, here's what my loving wife didn't know about her unemployed loser husband. I wasn't always a laid-off factory worker, scraping by on odd jobs. 5 years ago, I was Nathan Holloway, the DOJ whistleblower, who exposed Millfield Development's illegal toxic waste dumping. The same Millfield Development that her new boyfriend Chad Moffat worked for as an environmental consultant. The same Chad who'd been falsifying soil reports for 3 years. The same Chad who'd been sleeping with my wife for 8 months, planning to get rid of the dead weight so they could cash in on what they thought was valuable riverfront property. The same property I'd deliberately purchased 2 years ago, knowing full well it carried a massive EPA cleanup liability that would eventually come due. I'd been Nathan Holloway, environmental engineer and federal witness, before I became Brent, the nobody husband she could cheat on without consequence. I'd changed my name, moved to this dying mill town, and married a yoga instructor who thought she'd landed herself a safe, boring provider. But boring men with government connections and a decade of environmental law experience? We're the most dangerous kind. My phone rang again. This time, it was Chad. "Listen, you son of a bitch," he started, his polished consultant voice cracking with panic. "I don't know what game you're playing, but..." "No game," I interrupted. "Just consequences. You falsified environmental reports for a property with known contamination. That's a federal crime. Your girlfriend signed liability transfer documents. That's legally binding. And you both thought you were so much smarter than the dumb factory worker. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can." I pulled out my laptop and opened the video file. See, I installed some security cameras in my home office last year. Amazing what people will say when they think they're alone. The video showed Chad and Deb in my own house, on my own couch, discussing their plans in explicit detail. Not just the affair, but the whole scheme. How Chad would help her divorce me and claim the property. How they'd develop the riverfront once the loser was out of the picture. Funny thing about those soil reports you filed, I continued. I've got copies of the real ones. The ones that show heavy metal contamination, chemical runoff, and enough environmental damage to keep lawyers busy for decades. The EPA's very interested in how those reports got altered. Chad's breathing was getting ragged. What do you want? Nothing, I said. I already got it. 3 days later, I was leaving Gold's law office after filing the final paperwork when I noticed the black SUV following me. Not Chad's Tesla. This was something else entirely. Something with tinted windows and plates I didn't recognize. I'd made a lot of enemies in my DOJ days. Millfield Development had cartel connections, money laundering operations that went way deeper than environmental fraud. When I'd testified 5 years ago, I'd put some very dangerous people in prison. Apparently, they were getting out. I took a hard right down Riverside Avenue, heading for the old industrial district. If these guys wanted to play, I'd choose the playground. The abandoned Millfield factory complex stretched for 6 blocks, a maze of empty buildings and rusted machinery that I knew better than anyone. The SUV accelerated behind me, no longer bothering with subtlety. I floored my beat-up Honda and dove into the factory complex, tires squealing as I navigated between concrete barriers and abandoned equipment. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Stop running. We just want to talk. Right. The kind of talk that ended with shallow graves. I abandoned the car and ran for Building C, the old chemical processing plant. I'd spent months here during the investigation, mapping every corridor, every emergency exit, every safety system. The place was condemned but not demolished, a perfect maze of industrial decay. Footsteps echoed behind me as I reached the main floor. 2 men, maybe 3, moving with military precision. These weren't street thugs. They were professionals. I made it to the control room and slammed the blast door, the same safety system that had protected workers from chemical explosions back when this place was operational. 6 inches of reinforced steel between me and whatever they had planned. "You can't hide forever, Holloway," one of them shouted. "We know who you are. We know what you did." I activated the emergency lockdown sequence, sealing off their section of the building. The old safety system still worked. Amazing what proper maintenance could do. They'd be stuck in there for hours until the fire department could cut them out. While they pounded on the blast door, I slipped out through the maintenance tunnel that connected to Building D. By the time they realized I was gone, I was already 3 blocks away, calling Tommy from a payphone. "You need to disappear for a while," I told him. "Things are about to get interesting." The city council meeting was standing room only. Word had gotten out that the EPA was making a major announcement about local environmental hazards. And in a town like ours, that kind of news drew a crowd. I sat in the back row, wearing my best suit and a satisfied smile, watching Deb and Chad squirm in their front row seats. They still thought they could somehow wiggle out of this. Maybe hire lawyers, maybe claim fraud. They had no idea what was coming. Mayor Patricia Williams called the meeting to order, her voice grave with official importance. "We're here today to address a serious environmental situation that affects our entire community. I'd like to introduce EPA Regional Director Sarah Martinez." Martinez was a stern woman in her 50s, the kind of federal bureaucrat who ate corporate lawyers for breakfast. I'd worked with her during the original Millfield investigation. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martinez began consulting her tablet, "we're here to discuss the contamination status of the property located at 1247 Riverside Drive, formerly owned by Millfield Development, currently owned by—" She paused for dramatic effect. "Mrs. Deborah Holloway. Every head in the room turned to stare at Deb. The local news cameras zoomed in on her face as it went from confused to horrified in real time. The property in question contains significant heavy metal contamination, chemical runoff from illegal dumping, and soil toxicity levels that exceed federal safety standards by a factor of 12. The estimated cost of remediation is $4.7 million, for which the current property owner bears full legal responsibility. Deb shot to her feet. That's impossible. My husband tricked me. I never agreed to— Ma'am, Martinez interrupted. We have the signed transfer documents on file. You accepted full liability for this property of your own free will. The EPA considers this matter closed from a legal standpoint. Chad was pulling at Deb's arm, trying to get her to sit down, but she was past rational thought. This is fraud. My husband is a nobody, a factory worker. He can't just— Actually, I said, standing up in the back of the room, I think there's been a misunderstanding. All eyes turned to me. I walked slowly down the center aisle, enjoying every second of Deb's growing panic. You see, I'm not just a factory worker. I'm Nathan Holloway, the DOJ environmental specialist, who originally investigated Millfield Development, the same investigation that led to federal charges against the company your boyfriend works for. Chad went white as a sheet. Several people in the crowd gasped. Mrs. Blevins, our elderly neighbor, actually started applauding. I purchased that property specifically because I knew about the contamination. I knew the liability would eventually come due, and I knew that anyone stupid enough to sign transfer documents without reading them would deserve exactly what they got. Deb was shaking now, her yoga instructor composure completely shattered. You can't do this. We have a son together. You can't just— Actually, I said, pulling out another set of documents. About that. Turns out our marriage certificate was forged. You filed fraudulent paperwork to get better mortgage terms 5 years ago. We were never legally married, which means you have no claim on Mason, no claim on any assets, and no legal standing to contest anything. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The news cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of Deb's public destruction. This would be on social media within the hour, local news by tonight. Chad tried to make a run for it, but Tommy was waiting by the exit. My old factory buddy had been hitting the gym hard since the layoffs, and he was more than happy to escort Chad back to his seat. Sit down, pretty boy, Tommy growled. Show's not over yet. While Deb was dealing with her EPA nightmare, I was busy unraveling the larger conspiracy that had put me in danger. Chad's environmental consulting firm wasn't just falsifying reports. They were helping the cartel launder money through fake development projects. I'd figured it out during my warehouse escape. The men chasing me weren't just random thugs. They were cartel enforcers trying to protect a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation that I'd accidentally exposed. Chad had been filing false environmental reports to help the cartel purchase contaminated properties at below-market prices. They'd hold the land for a few years, then sell it to legitimate developers who didn't know about the contamination. The profits would be clean money, laundered through what appeared to be standard real estate transactions. But when I transferred the Riverside property to Deb, I'd inadvertently made her the legal owner of a key piece in their operation. The cartel wanted their property back, and they weren't the type to negotiate. I was sitting in Tommy's garage, explaining the situation, when his police scanner crackled to life. All units, we have a disturbance at Harmony Yoga Studio, 1845 Main Street. Reports of threatening behavior, possible weapons involved. Tommy and I looked at each other. Harmony Yoga was Deb's studio. Think we should check it out? Tommy asked, already reaching for his keys. Absolutely, I said. Wouldn't want to miss the show. We arrived just as two men in expensive suits were leaving the yoga studio. They walked with the casual confidence of people who were used to getting their way through intimidation. Deb's car was still in the parking lot, but the studio lights were off. I found her in the back office, sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up to her chest. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. They know about Chad, she whispered without looking up. They know about the money, the reports, everything. They said I have 48 hours to sign the property back over to them, or— She shuddered. They showed me pictures, Brent. Pictures of what they do to people who interfere with their business. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. What did you tell them? I asked. That I can't. The EPA won't let me transfer the property until the contamination is resolved. I'm trapped. She finally looked up at me, her eyes red and desperate. They're going to kill me, aren't they? I sat down across from her, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. Probably, unless what? Unless someone with federal connections and witness protection experience happened to help you disappear. Someone who knew how these organizations operated, who understood their weaknesses. Hope flickered in her eyes. You'd do that? After everything I did to you?
2 key cards. You asked for 2. Who was the second 4?
My colleague needed a place.
Your colleague who calls you baby in her texts?
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
I smiled. Not for the right price. Deb's stress-induced heart attack happened 2 days later, right in the middle of her desperate attempt to liquidate assets and flee the state. Tommy found her collapsed in the bank parking lot, clutching her chest and gasping for breath. The paramedics said it was a mild cardiac event, brought on by extreme anxiety and exhaustion. She'd be fine with rest and proper medication, but she'd also be stuck in the hospital for at least 72 hours of observation. 72 hours she didn't have. I visited her on the second day, bringing flowers and wearing my most concerned husband expression. The nurses thought it was sweet how devoted I was, staying by her bedside, holding her hand while she slept. What they didn't see was me quietly disconnecting her phone charger, or switching her anxiety medication with harmless vitamins, or making sure she stayed just agitated enough to extend her hospital stay. The cartel called, she whispered when she woke up. They're coming tonight. They don't care that I'm in the hospital. I know, I said. I've been thinking about our conversation, about helping you disappear. And I'll do it. But first, you need to sign some documents. Transfer of custody, power of attorney, a few other legal details. She signed everything without reading it, just like she'd signed the property transfer. Desperation made people stupid, and Deb had always been too arrogant to pay attention to details. When do we leave? She asked. Soon, I promised. Very soon. What I didn't tell her was that the documents she'd just signed included a full confession to conspiracy, money laundering, and environmental fraud. I also didn't mention that I'd already contacted the FBI about the cartel's money laundering operation, or that federal agents were positioned throughout the hospital. The cartel enforcers arrived at 2 a.m., just as I had expected. They made it as far as the lobby before FBI agents surrounded them. Turns out, threatening a federal witness's family was taken very seriously by law enforcement. Deb watched the arrest through her hospital room window, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally pure rage. You set them up, she said. You set all of us up. I protected my son, I corrected. Everything else was just bonus. Chad's immunity deal came through faster than I'd expected. Faced with federal charges for money laundering, environmental fraud, and conspiracy, he rolled over on everyone. The cartel, Millfield Development, and especially Deb. The federal courthouse was packed for his testimony. I sat in the gallery watching my wife's lover destroy what was left of her life with clinical precision. Mrs. Holloway approached me about the affair, Chad testified, his voice steady and professional. She said she wanted to get rid of her husband and cash in on their property. She knew about my work with Millfield Development and asked me to help falsify environmental reports. Deb's public defender objected, but the prosecutor had recordings, documents, and now Chad's testimony. The case was airtight. She was the one who suggested transferring the contaminated property to herself, Chad continued. She thought she could manipulate her husband into signing it over, then claim ignorance about the environmental issues. It was beautiful to watch. Every lie Deb had told, every manipulation she'd attempted, every cruel word she'd spoken about me, it all came back to destroy her credibility. The jury saw her exactly as she was, a greedy, calculating woman who'd been caught in her own trap. The prosecutor played the security camera footage from my home office. Deb and Chad's voices filled the courtroom as they discussed their plans in explicit detail. Once we get rid of Brent, Deb's voice said clearly, we can develop that riverfront property and finally have some real money. I'm tired of pretending to love a loser. Chad's voice responded, I can make sure the environmental reports come back clean. No one will ever know about the contamination. The jury looked disgusted. Even Deb's lawyer was shaking his head. When it was over, Chad walked out of the courthouse, a free man, protected by his immunity deal. Deb was led away in handcuffs, facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. I didn't feel sorry for her, not even a little bit. 3 weeks after the trial, Deb made bail pending her appeal. Her parents had mortgaged their house, called in every favor, liquidated their retirement savings, anything to get their daughter out of jail, while her lawyers tried to find some technicality to overturn her conviction. She showed up at the Blue Loon on a Friday night when she knew I'd be there with Tommy and the other guys from the old factory. The whole bar went quiet when she walked in, her yoga instructor confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who'd lost everything. I need to talk to you, she said, approaching our table. Tommy started to stand up, but I waved him off. Let her talk. I know you hate me, Deb began, her voice shaking. I know I deserve everything that's happened, but Mason is your son. He needs his mother. Please don't let them take me away from him. The entire bar was listening now. Mrs. Blevins was at her usual corner table, practically vibrating with anticipation. This would be all over town by morning. Mason doesn't want to see you, I said calmly. He asked me not to bring you up anymore. Said it made him sad to think about how you tried to give him away. That's not true. You signed custody transfer documents, I interrupted. You literally gave away your own son to chase after another man. Mason knows that. He's 10, not stupid. Deb's composure cracked completely. She grabbed a pool cue from the nearby table and swung it at my head. I ducked easily, yoga flexibility was no match for factory reflexes, and let her momentum carry her into the wall. You destroyed my life, Sayuri, she screamed, swinging the cue wildly. You destroyed everything. Tommy finally intervened, grabbing the pool cue and pinning Deb's arms. That's enough, lady. Time to go. But I wasn't done yet. Hey, Mickey, I called to the bartender. Mind if I use your TV for a minute? Mickey nodded and handed me the remote. I'd been carrying a flash drive for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. The bar's TV flickered to life, showing the security footage from my home office. But not the footage they'd played in court. This was different. This was Deb and Chad after their first time together, lying naked in my bed, in my house, planning their future. God, I can't wait to get rid of him. Deb's voice filled the bar. He's so pathetic. Always trying to please me, always apologizing for not being successful enough. It's disgusting. Chad's voice. What about the kid? What about him? Mason will be better off with a real father figure. Someone with money and ambition. Brent's just dead weight. The bar was completely silent now. Even Mrs. Blevins had stopped pretending to read her newspaper. Everyone was staring at the TV, then at Deb, then back at the TV. That's not, Deb whispered. You can't just... Can't what? I asked. Show people who you really are? This is what you said about our son, about our marriage, about me. This is what you really think of the people who love you. Deb collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Please turn it off, please. Why? Embarrassed? This is just the truth, Deb. Your truth. Tommy was looking at me with something approaching awe. Jesus, Brent, remind me never to piss you off. I turned off the TV and pocketed the flash drive. The thing is, Deb, I could have forgiven the affair. I could have forgiven you falling out of love with me. But trying to take my son, calling him deadweight, that was your mistake. Security finally arrived to escort her out. As they dragged her toward the door, she turned back to me one last time. I'll appeal, she said. I'll fight this. You'll lose, I said simply. You always lose, when you're not smart enough to read the fine print. The appeals court upheld Deb's conviction 6 months later. Her lawyers had tried everything. Claims of entrapment, prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective counsel. But the evidence was overwhelming. She was going to federal prison for a minimum of 15 years. I was cleaning out the last of her belongings when I found her journal, hidden behind some yoga DVDs in our bedroom closet. I probably should have thrown it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The entries went back 3 years, long before Chad, long before the affair. Page after page of complaints about our marriage, about me, about the life she felt trapped in. Brent is so boring, one entry read. He thinks his little engineering job makes him important, but he's just another factory worker. I married him because he seemed safe, but safe is just another word for mediocre. Another entry from 2 years ago. Saw Chad at the environmental hearing today. He's exactly the kind of man I should have married. Successful, confident, going places. Not like Brent, who's content to fix other people's problems for the rest of his life. And then the entry that made everything clear. Found some old paperwork in Brent's desk. Something about DOJ testimony in environmental cases. Why would a factory worker have federal documents? Maybe he's not as boring as I thought. Maybe there's money here I don't know about. She'd known. Not everything, but enough. She'd known I wasn't just a laid-off factory worker, and she'd tried to use that knowledge to her advantage. The affair with Chad wasn't just about love or lust. It was a calculated attempt to access what she thought were hidden assets. But she'd been too arrogant to dig deeper, too impatient to wait for the full truth. If she'd just asked me directly about my past, I might have told her. We might have worked things out. Instead, she'd chosen manipulation and betrayal. She'd chosen to give away our son to a man she barely knew. She'd chosen greed over family. I closed the journal and threw it in the trash. Some stories didn't deserve to be preserved. The day Deb was sentenced, I stood on the courthouse steps with Mason, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. The judge had given her the maximum, 20 years for conspiracy, money laundering, and environmental fraud. With good behavior, she might be out in 15. Mason would be 25 by then, old enough to make his own decisions about whether he wanted a relationship with his mother. "Dad," he said, tugging on my sleeve, "are you sad about Mom?" I looked down at my son, legally and completely now, and considered the question seriously. Was I sad? Angry? Relieved? "I'm sad that she made the choices she made," I said finally. "But I'm not sad about the consequences. Will you tell me about her when I'm older? The real stuff, not just the good parts? If you want to know, I'll tell you. But for now, let's just focus on being a family. You and me." Mason nodded, satisfied with that answer. We walked to my car, not the beat-up Honda anymore, but a sensible Toyota I'd bought with the consulting fees from helping the FBI unravel the cartel's money laundering network. Turns out, environmental engineers with federal experience and insider knowledge were in high demand. I had job offers from 3 different agencies and a private consulting contract that would keep us comfortable for years. Mrs. Blevins was waiting by my car, probably hoping for one last piece of gossip to share with her bridge club. "That was quite a show," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. 20 years. That's a long time." "It is," I agreed. "You know, I always knew there was more to you than met the eye. Quiet ones are always the most dangerous." I smiled and helped Mason into the passenger seat. "Have a good day, Mrs. Blevins." As we drove away, I caught her in the rearview mirror, already pulling out her phone to call someone. By dinner time, the whole town would know exactly how Deborah Holloway's story had ended, and how Nathan Holloway's story was just beginning. 2 years later, Mason and I were living in a different house, in a different town, far from the gossip and memories of our old life. I'd taken a position with the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division, helping to prosecute environmental crimes across New England. Mason was thriving in his new school, playing Little League baseball and taking guitar lessons. He'd grown 3 inches and lost most of his baby fat, starting to look like the young man he'd become someday. He asked about Deb sometimes, but less and less as time went on. I kept my promise to answer his questions honestly, but I never volunteered information he wasn't ready for. The cartel members who'd threatened us were serving life sentences in federal prison. Chad had disappeared into witness protection after testifying against them, probably selling insurance in some small Midwestern town under an assumed name. And Deb? According to the prison website, she was serving her time at FCI Danbury, working in the library and teaching yoga classes to other inmates. She'd written to Mason a few times, but he'd asked me to stop giving him the letters. "I don't want to read them," he'd said. "Not yet, maybe when I'm older." I respected that choice. The letters went into a box in my closet. waiting for a day that might never come. On quiet evenings when Mason was doing homework and I was grading environmental impact reports, I sometimes thought about the choices that had led us here. The lies, the betrayals, the carefully planned revenge that had destroyed one life and saved another. I didn't regret any of it. Not the investigation, not the legal traps, not the public humiliation. Deb had made her choices, and I'd simply ensured that she faced the consequences. Some people might call it cruel. Others might call it justice. I called it reading the fine print. Mason looked up from his math homework, pencil tapping against his lips in concentration. Dad, can you help me with this word problem? Sure, buddy, what's it about? A man has to split his estate between his wife and his son. The wife gets 2/3 and the son gets 1/3. But then the wife tries to take the son's share too. How much does the son end up with? I smiled and sat down next to him. That depends. Did the man read the contract carefully before he signed it? I don't know, it doesn't say. Then let me tell you a story about a man who always read the fine print